Hollywood has witnessed many handsome and charismatic black male actors who have captivated millions of hearts from the 1970s to the 1990s. They were once icons of style, beauty, and talent. But where are they now? Let's take a look back at the transformative journeys of over 50 of these legendary stars. 1. Denzel Washington. With his masculine appearance, sharp eyes, and attractive demeanor, Denzel Washington is the epitome of a gentleman in Glory, Malcolm X, and Training Day. At the age of 69, he still maintains his form, continuing to act and direct, with a strong influence in Hollywood. 2. Eddie Murphy. Then, with a radiant smile and charming acting style, Eddie Murphy was a comedy superstar of the 80s and 90s through Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America. Now, today, Eddie continues to act, recently returning with Coming to America and keeping audiences laughing with fresh roles. 3. Wesley Snipes. Then, with a chiseled physique and cool demeanor, Wesley Snipes became an action movie legend with Blade and New Jack City. Now, at 62, he still takes on action roles but appears less frequently, focusing on personal projects and investments. 4. Samuel L. Jackson. Then, Samuel brought a gritty style, powerful voice, and piercing gaze to standout roles in Pulp Fiction and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Now, he remains a Hollywood legend, leaving his mark on the Marvel franchise with his commanding performances. 5. Blair Underwood. Then, a handsome face and captivating smile helped Blair Underwood win over audiences in LA Law and Set It Off. Now, at 60, he maintains his refined charm, appearing in various TV projects and Broadway productions. 6. Morris Chestnut. Then, with a muscular build and sweet smile, Morris Chestnut was a heartthrob in Boys in the Hood and The Best Man. Now, at 55, he's still in top form, starring in TV series like The Resident. 7. Michael Bivins. Then, a member of New Edition with a bold hip-hop style, Michael Bivins stole the hearts of female fans in the 80s and 90s. Now, he focuses primarily on music production while retaining his appeal in the entertainment world. 8. Terrence Howard. Then, with soulful eyes and a polished style, Terrence Howard made his mark in Hustle and Flow and The Best Man. Now, though he announced his retirement, he's still remembered for his role as Lucius Lyon in Empire. 9. Richard Roundtree. Then, he was the epitome of 70s cool as Detective Shaft, exuding style and strength. Now, Richard continued acting until his passing in 2023, leaving behind a monumental cinematic legacy. 10. Don Cheadle. Then, Don Cheadle impressed with his sharp acting and charm in Hotel Rwanda and Boogie Nights. Now, he remains an A-list star, appearing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and other major projects. 11. Idris Elba. Then, with a deep voice, magnetic gaze, and strong physique, Idris Elba shone in The Wire and Luther. Now, he's still a symbol of masculinity, starring in blockbusters and pursuing his DJ music career. 12. Billy D. Williams. Then, with a gentlemanly flair and signature mustache, Billy D. Williams dazzled as Lando Calrissian in Star Wars. Now, at 87, he appears less often but remains a Hollywood icon. 13. Taye Diggs. Then, with a toned physique and seductive smile, Taye Diggs won fans in How Stella Got Her Groove Back and The Best Man. Now, he maintains his appeal, starring in TV shows like All American and performing on Broadway. 14. Shamar Moore. Then, Shamar Moore was the quintessential charming bad boy with bronzed skin, famous for The Young and the Restless and Criminal Minds. Now, at 54, he stays fit and leads the cast of SWAT. 15. Michael Ealy. Then, striking blue eyes and a mysterious smile made Michael Ealy a fan favorite in Barbershop and Think Like a Man. Now, he remains remarkably youthful and stars in TV projects like The Devil You Know. 16. LL Cool J. Then, a rapper turned actor with a muscular build, LL Cool J was a masculine icon of the 80s and 90s and in the house. Now, he stays in shape, acting in NCIS, Los Angeles, and hosting Lip Sync Battle. 17. Mekhi Phifer. Then, with sharp eyes and a rugged look, Mekhi Phifer captivated audiences in 8 Mile and ER. Now, at 50, he's less active on screen, focusing on business and independent projects. 18. Cuba Gooding Jr. Then, with a bright smile and engaging performances, Cuba Gooding Jr. rose to fame in Jerry Maguire and Boys in the Hood. Now, his career has been impacted by legal scandals, but he retains a certain allure in the industry. 19. Carl Weathers. Then, an action icon with a powerful physique, Carl Weathers stood out as Apollo Creed in Rocky. Now, he continued acting until his passing in 2024, leaving a lasting cinematic legacy. 20. Leon Robinson. Then, with smooth brown skin and a romantic vibe, Leon Robinson shone in the 5 Heartbeats and Cool Runnings. Now, at 62, he remains stylish and active in musical theater and music. 21. Jesse L. Martin. Then, with a warm smile and refined demeanor, Jesse L. Martin excelled in Law and Order and the musical Rent. Now, he retains his charm, starring in The Flash and performing on Broadway. 22. Michael Jai White. Then, with a muscular frame and martial arts skills, Michael Jai White impressed in Spawn and Black Dynamite. Now, at 57, he's still in great shape, acting in action films and training in martial arts. 23. Lawrence Tate. Then, with captivating eyes and a youthful look, Lawrence Tate won hearts in Love Jones and Menace to Society. Now, he remains strikingly youthful and continues acting, recently in Power. 24. Malik Yoba. Then, a chiseled face and strong presence made Malik Yoba stand out in New York Undercover and Cool Runnings. Now, he remains active in TV and is a dedicated social activist. 25. Harry Lennox. Then, with a deep voice and commanding presence, Harry Lennox impressed in The 5 Heartbeats and The Matrix Reloaded. Now, at 60, he stars in major projects like The Blacklist and produces independent films. 26. Delroy Lindo. Then, with his strong demeanor and powerful voice, Delroy Lindo made his mark in Clockers and Get Shorty. Now, at age 71, he's still a veteran actor, most recently appearing in Spike Lee's The Five Bloods. 27. T.C. Carson. Then, possessing a deep voice and elegant style, T.C. Carson is famous for living single and voicing Kratos in God of War. Now, he is still active in acting and voice acting, occasionally appearing in television projects. 28. Keith David. Then, Keith David's unique voice and powerful demeanor help him shine in Platoon and They Live. Now, at the age of 68, he still acts and voices many big projects like Rick and Morty. 29. Ving Rhames. Then, with his deep voice and athletic body, Ving Rhames distinguished himself through Pulp Fiction and Mission Impossible. Now, he still maintains his attraction, continuing to participate in the Mission Impossible series with Tom Cruise. 30. Charles S. Dutton. Then, Charles S. Dutton's angular face and strong style help him shine in Rock and Alien 3. Now, at the age of 73, he still acts but less, mainly working as a director and producer. 31. Richard Roundtree. Then, with his cool demeanor and signature mustache, Richard Roundtree became an icon in the Shaft series. Now, before his death in 2023, he still appeared in many television projects, maintaining the title king of blaxploitation. 32. Blair Underwood. Then, with a handsome face and captivating smile, Blair Underwood conquered audiences through LA Law and Set It Off. Now, at the age of 60, he is still in good shape, participating in many television series such as Your Honor and Quantico. 33. Morris Chestnut. Then, possessing a toned physique and elegant appearance, Morris Chestnut stands out through Boys in the Hood and The Best Man. Now, he still maintains his handsome appearance and continues to be successful with the series The Resident. 34. Wesley Snipes. Then, with his muscular body and martial arts skills, Wesley Snipes conquered the screen through Blade and New Jack City. Now, after a period of legal trouble, he returned strongly with Coming to America and new projects. 35. Mario Van Peebles. Then, with his sharp eyes and artistic demeanor, Mario Van Peebles made his mark in New Jack City. Now, at the age of 67, you still act in films, but focus more on directing and producing. 36. Dorian Harewood. Then, with his deep voice and masculine face, Dorian Harewood is known for Full Metal Jacket and The Jesse Owens Story. Now, at the age of 74, he rarely appears on screen, mainly participating in voice acting for animated films. 37. Glenn Plummer. Then, Glenn Plummer's unique face and street style helped him make his mark in Menace to Society and South Central. Now, you still act but focus on independent film and television projects. 38. Abba Babatunde. Then, possessing a stylish appearance and an inspiring voice, Abba Babatunde shines on Broadway and television. Now, at the age of 73, he is still diligently acting and is a familiar face on the small screen. 39. Avery Brooks. Then, with his deep voice and piercing eyes, Avery Brooks stood out as Captain Sisko in Star Trek: Deep Space Nine. Now, he has moved away from Hollywood, focusing on teaching and performing theater arts. 40. Dennis Haysbert. Then, with his tall physique and masculine voice, Dennis Haysbert stood out in 24 and Major League. Now, at the age of 70, he is still a familiar actor on television and voices many commercials. 41. Eric LaSalle. Then, with his intellectual demeanor and handsome looks, Eric LaSalle stood out in Coming to America and ER. Now, he turned his attention to directing and producing, contributing to television series such as Chicago PD. 42. Giancarlo Esposito. Then, with his piercing eyes and mysterious demeanor, Giancarlo Esposito impressed in Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X. Now, at the age of 66, he still maintains his charm and popularity in series like Breaking Bad and The Mandalorian. 43. Isaiah Washington. Then, with his angular face and strong demeanor, Isaiah Washington stands out through Grey's Anatomy and Romeo Must Die. Now, after some controversy, he withdrew from Hollywood and focused on independent projects. 44. Michael Beach. Then, with his masculine appearance and introspective acting style, Michael Beach impressed in Waiting to Exhale and Third Watch. Now, at age 61, he is still very active on television, most recently as mayor of Kingstown. 45. Clifton Powell. Then, Clifton Powell's tough face and personal style help him stand out in Dead Presidents and Next Friday. Now, at the age of 68, you still act regularly and participate in many television projects. 46. Michael T. Williamson. Then, with her natural acting and emotional eyes, Michael T. Williamson is remembered for Forrest Gump and Heat. Now, he is still active in the industry, appearing in The Purge, Election Year, and many television series. 47. Bokeem Woodbine. Then, with his strong demeanor and angular face, Bokeem Woodbine stands out through Jason's Lyric and Dead Presidents. Now, at age 51, he still maintains a successful career with roles in Fargo and Halo. 48. Leon. Then, possessing a romantic figure and seductive eyes, Leon shines in the 5 Heartbeats and Cool Runnings. Now, at age 62, he continues his singing and acting career, remaining in incredible shape. 49. Rockman Dunbar. Then, with his muscular body and attractive appearance, Rockman Dunbar stands out in Prison Break and Soul Food. Now, you continue to act, most recently in 911, despite some controversy over vaccination laws. 50. D.B. Woodside. Then, with his elegant demeanor and charismatic smile, D.B. Woodside made his mark in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The Temptations. Now, at the age of 55, he is still in shape and participates in many television projects such as Lucifer and The Night Agent. These stars not only conquered audiences with their handsome appearance and charismatic demeanor, but also left a deep mark in popular culture from the 1970s to 1990s. Even though time has passed, they continue to shine in many different ways. Some remain attached to the screen, others turn to directing, producing, or enjoying their own lives. No matter what stage of their career they are, they will always be memorable icons in the hearts of fans. Who are you most impressed with on this list? Please share your thoughts in the comments section.